The call came in at 1:27 a.m., the kind of call that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Dispatch sounded rattled. Unit 45, proceed to 724 Marlborough Avenue. Report of multiple 911 hang-ups and screams heard. No answer on callback. Be advised, nearest unit is 20 minutes out. I was alone that night, patrolling a quiet stretch of suburbs that felt too eerie when the fog rolled in. My partner had called in sick, so it was just me in the cruiser, sipping lukewarm coffee and praying for an uneventful night. But this felt different. When I pulled up to the address, the house stood like a mausoleum. A 2-story colonial, with peeling paint and a lawn that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The street was silent, not even the hum of a streetlight. It felt like the house had sucked the life out of the block. I radioed in. Unit 45 on scene. No visual movement. Lights are off. Investigating. My voice sounded steady, but my pulse was anything but. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was heavy, almost wet, and the fog seemed to cling to the ground, swirling around my boots like something alive. The house loomed over me, its broken shutters creaking in the faint breeze. The front door was ajar, just enough to make my stomach twist. My training kicked in. I drew my sidearm, checked my corners, and called out, "Police! Is anyone inside?" No answer. The first step into the house felt like stepping into a tomb. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so, and carried the faint scent of decay. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a living room frozen in time. Dust-coated furniture, a TV from the 80s, and family photos on the wall. A man, woman, and 2 kids, smiling like they had the perfect life. But that smile didn't reach the eyes. The scream came from upstairs, high-pitched and guttural, like someone was being dragged through hell. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. Someone needed help. I ascended the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. "Police! Show yourself!" My voice sounded alien, swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed the scream. The hallway at the top was lined with closed doors, and at the far end, one door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and my blood turned to ice. The room was a child's bedroom. Toys were strewn across the floor, and the walls were covered in crayon drawings, but not the happy kind. Dark figures loomed over tiny stick families. Red scribbles splattered across the paper like blood. In the center of the room, a wooden rocking chair swayed back and forth, but there was no one in sight. Then I saw it. A shadow moved across the wall, but there was no source for it. It was tall, too tall to be human, and its limbs seemed to stretch unnaturally. It stopped, turning as if it could see me, even though it had no eyes. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged up in front of me as I backed away, my gun trained on the impossible figure. "Stay where you are," I shouted, though my voice quaked. The shadow didn't move. Instead, the door behind me slammed shut, and the rocking chair stopped. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and childlike, whispering from somewhere in the room. "You shouldn't be here." My flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the streetlight outside, leaking through the window. The shadow moved, fast. It darted across the room, and I felt it before I saw it. An overwhelming presence, pressing down on me like a vice. My instincts took over. I fired, the muzzle flash lighting up the room in bursts. Nothing. The bullets passed through the figure like it wasn't there. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices that weren't human. They were chanting something I couldn't understand, and it was getting closer. I ran. Down the stairs, through the living room, out the door. My cruiser was a beacon of safety, its lights cutting through the fog. I didn't stop running until I was inside, locking the doors and fumbling for the radio. Unit 45 requesting immediate backup. Officer under attack. 724 Marlborough Avenue. Static. The voices didn't stop. They were in the car now, filling the air around me. I floored it, tearing out of the driveway and down the empty street, but no matter how far I drove, the whispers stayed. When I finally reached the station, I was shaking so badly I could barely get out of the car. My fellow officers found me pale and sweating, rambling about shadows and whispers. The house at 724 Marlborough Avenue didn't exist. At least that's what the records said. But I know what I saw, and I'll never patrol alone again. I spent the rest of that night at the station, trying to piece together what the hell had just happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow. Every time I tried to shake it off, I heard the whispers. Couldn't go home. Not like this. So, I sat in the break room, staring at the wall clock as its hands crawled toward dawn. When the shift supervisor, Sergeant Harper, came in at 6 a.m., I decided to tell him everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the shadow and the voices, sticking to unexplainable activity at the house. Harper's face went pale when I mentioned the address. 724 Marlborough? He repeated, his voice quieter than usual. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he was bracing for bad news. That house has been abandoned for decades. Last anyone remembers, the family just disappeared. Disappeared. I echoed, unsure if I'd heard him right. Harper nodded, his brow furrowed. Yeah, back in the late 80s. Father, mother, 2 kids. No signs of a struggle, no bodies, no leads. Just gone. The case is still open, technically, but it's cold as hell. Weird part is, neighbors reported seeing lights on in the house for weeks after they were gone. Police chalked it up to squatters, but no one was ever found inside. Why didn't dispatch mention that when they sent me out there? I asked, my throat dry. He shrugged. It's just an address now. Paperwork's buried so deep no one remembers. But I'll tell you this. Harper leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're not the first cop to come back spooked from that place. What do you mean? About 10 years ago, a rookie named Daniels got sent there on a welfare check. Same deal, 911 hang-ups, screaming. When backup arrived, they found his cruiser abandoned on the street. Daniels was inside the house, sitting in that rocking chair, muttering to himself. Took weeks for him to talk again. And when he did, it was gibberish about shadows and a voice in the walls. He quit the force not long after. A chill ran down my spine. And no one thought to tell new guys about this? Harper sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, cops deal with crazy stuff every day. Some of it you can't explain, but you've got to move on. Otherwise, it eats you alive. His words stuck with me as I drove home that morning, but they didn't bring me any comfort. My apartment felt different, smaller somehow. Shadows pooled in the corners, and I swore I could still hear faint whispers under the hum of my refrigerator. Sleep wasn't an option. By the time night fell, I'd convinced myself that I needed answers. I couldn't just let this sit. If I didn't go back, it'd haunt me forever. So I grabbed my gear, flashlight, sidearm, and my old digital recorder I used for interviews. If I was going back to 724 Marlborough, I was documenting everything. The street was deathly quiet when I arrived, the house standing as it had before, cloaked in shadow. This time, though, I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from one of the upstairs windows. It stopped the moment I stepped out of the car. I set the recorder on my dashboard, hit record, and started speaking. This is Officer Jake Monroe, investigating 724 Marlborough Avenue at 9:14 p.m. following reports of... The tapping started again, louder this time. It wasn't coming from upstairs anymore. It was coming from inside the cruiser. My hands froze as I realized the sound was against the windshield, like fingers drumming on glass. I whipped around, shining my flashlight at the car. Nothing was there. Get a grip, I muttered to myself, but my voice cracked. I entered the house, every nerve in my body on edge. The air was colder than before, biting at my skin even through my jacket. I could hear the faint hum of electricity, though no lights were on. My flashlight beam danced over the walls, landing on the family photos again. The faces looked different now. Their smiles were gone. The rocking chair was still in the child's bedroom, motionless this time. I set my recorder on the floor and started asking questions. Who's here? What do you want? My voice echoed in the emptiness, unanswered. Then the whispers began again. This time I could make out words. "Why did you come back?" They weren't whispers anymore. They were voices, overlapping and growing louder, coming from every direction. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The rocking chair creaked, moving on its own. "Leave," the voices said, almost pleading. I grabbed the recorder and ran, my heart pounding. As I reached the front door, I turned for one last look. Standing in the hallway was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. When I got back to the car, the recorder was still running. I played it back, hoping to make sense of what I'd heard. Instead, I heard my own voice, clear as day, saying something I didn't remember saying. "I'll be back." I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake, a big one, the kind that sticks to your soul like tar. I spent the next day listening to that recording over and over, trying to convince myself that I hadn't actually said, "I'll be back." But it was my voice. No distortion, no interference. Just me making a promise I didn't remember. The whispers didn't stop either. They were faint, almost imperceptible, but always there, hiding in the hiss of running water, in the hum of my fridge, in the white noise of my thoughts. They weren't just in the house. They'd followed me. That night, I decided to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Something in that house had latched onto me, and if I didn't deal with it, I was afraid it would never let go. I told no one. I didn't want Harper talking me out of it or anyone thinking I'd lost my mind. I left a note on my desk at the station just in case. A cryptic, "If I don't come back, check 724 Marlborough," and headed out. The street was eerily quiet again, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. Fog crept along the pavement, swirling around my feet as I stepped out of the cruiser. This time I brought backup, not another officer, but gear. An EMF meter from the evidence locker, extra flashlights, spare batteries, and a body cam clipped to my chest. If I didn't make it out, at least there'd be a record of whatever happened. The house was waiting for me. The front door was still ajar, just like before. I could feel the cold air seeping out from inside, carrying that faint, sickly sweet smell of decay. I stepped in, body cam recording, and announced myself. Officer Monroe, returning to 724 Marlborough Avenue at 10:17 p.m. My voice echoed in the silence, swallowed by the oppressive stillness. The air inside was heavier this time, like walking into a storm. The house felt alive, its walls seeming to breathe in sync with my shallow, panicked breaths. My flashlight flickered, and the EMF meter in my hand spiked, its red light flaring to life. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The living room looked the same, frozen in time, with its dust-covered furniture and eerie family photos. But something was off. The rocking chair was gone. The whispering started again, faint and distant, like it was coming from behind the walls. I followed the sound, my flashlight scanning every shadow, every corner. It led me to the basement door. I stared at the door for what felt like an eternity. Something about it felt wrong, like the wood itself was alive. The whispers grew louder as I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. When I opened it, a wave of cold air hit me, carrying the unmistakable scent of earth and rot. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into the darkness. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom, revealing cobwebs and old, rusted tools lining the walls. The whispers were louder now, a chaotic symphony of voices speaking over each other, but I still couldn't make out the words. At the bottom of the stairs, the room opened into a large, unfinished basement. The walls were bare concrete, cracked and stained with something dark. In the center of the room stood the rocking chair, facing away from me. I took a step closer, my boots crunching on the dirt-covered floor. The chair creaked, moving ever so slightly, and then it stopped. My flashlight beam landed on it, and for a moment, I thought it was empty. Then I saw the figure. It was hunched over, its long, bony hands gripping the armrests. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over its angular frame. Its head was tilted, and as I stepped closer, it turned. Its face was wrong. Hollow eyes, too large and too dark, stared back at me. Its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, filled with too many teeth. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me, feel its presence pressing down on my chest like a weight. The EMF meter in my hand went wild, its lights flashing erratically. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, the voices overlapping and blending into a cacophony that made my ears ring. I raised my gun, my voice shaking as I shouted, "Don't move!" The figure stood, its movements unnaturally fluid, like it didn't have bones. Took a step toward me and I fired. The shot echoed through the basement, but the figure didn't stop. It didn't even flinch. The lights on the body cam flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw something else. Shadows pouring out of the figure, writhing and twisting like living smoke. They surged toward me, and I felt an icy cold wrap around my chest. I don't remember how I got out of the house. The next thing I knew, I was in my cruiser, gasping for air. The body cam was still recording, but the footage was corrupted, just static and faint whispers. The whispers haven't stopped. They're with me now, following me everywhere I go. I see shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and at night, I dream of that figure, its hollow eyes and too wide grin. I don't think I'll survive this. Not really. But if you're reading this, if you hear whispers or feel the shadows closing in, stay away from Marlborough Avenue. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. For days after that night, I tried to return to normal. Patrols, coffee, paperwork, rinse, repeat. But nothing was the same. The whispers followed me everywhere. A low hum in my ears, faint but persistent. My reflection in mirrors seemed slower, like it was hesitating just a beat too long. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of the figure in the rocking chair, its too wide grin splitting open in the dark. It wasn't just in my head. Things started happening around me. Lights in my apartment flickered even when the power was steady. My phone would ring, but no one would be on the line. And once, while reviewing body cam footage for an unrelated case, I caught a glimpse of something. A shadow just out of frame moving behind me. But it was the message that broke me. I was sitting in my cruiser, parked on a side street during a quiet shift. My radio crackled to life, but it wasn't dispatch. It wasn't even words at first, just static and faint whispers. Then, a voice I recognized all too well came through. "Jake, come back." My blood ran cold. It was my own voice, distorted and hollow. "Who is this?" I demanded, grabbing the mic. "This is Officer Monroe. Identify yourself." The voice didn't respond. Instead, the radio erupted into static, a deafening screech that made me drop the mic. When it cut out, I realized something else was wrong. My cruiser wasn't where I'd left it. I looked around, my pulse hammering. The streetlights were gone. The houses were wrong, dark and unfamiliar, their windows like empty eyes staring at me. Somehow, without moving, I was back in front of 724 Marlborough Avenue. The house loomed in the fog, its windows dark and uninviting. I don't remember getting out of the car, but suddenly I was standing in front of the door, the same cold air seeping out through the cracks. This time, it wasn't ajar. It was wide open, waiting for me. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get in the car and drive until the whispers stopped. But I couldn't. Something was pulling me forward, an invisible force that wrapped around my chest and squeezed. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The house was alive now. The walls groaned, the floor creaked under its own weight, and the air was thick with whispers. They weren't distant anymore. They were right next to me, swirling around my head, overlapping and growing louder. "Why did you leave?" one voice asked. "You can't run," said another. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was closing. My flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. They didn't match the furniture. They moved on their own, crawling and writhing like living things. The rocking chair was back in the living room this time, facing the wall. Slowly, it began to turn, creaking with each movement. I raised my flashlight, my hand trembling, and saw what was sitting in it. It wasn't the figure from the basement. It was me. The thing in the chair was identical to me, down to the uniform and the body cam clipped to its chest. But its face was wrong. Its eyes were hollow, its skin pale and stretched too tight. It grinned at me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. What are you? I managed to choke out. The thing tilted its head, the grin widening. I'm you, the part you left behind. I don't understand, I said, taking a step back. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I saw something behind it. Shadows writhing like smoke, reaching for me. You shouldn't have come back, it said. Now you'll never leave. The shadows surged forward, and I ran. The house seemed to stretch around me, the hallway elongating as I sprinted toward the front door. The whispers turned into screams, and the walls began to close in, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal something black and pulsating beneath. I reached the door and yanked it open, stumbling out into the fog. But the street was gone. There was nothing outside but darkness. I don't know how long I ran. Time didn't exist in that place. Eventually, I found myself back in my cruiser, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The whispers were gone, replaced by the hum of the engine and the crackle of the radio. When I looked at the dashboard, the clock read 2:13 a.m. I'd been gone for less than an hour. I drove straight to the station, not trusting myself to be alone. Harper was waiting for me, his face pale. We've been trying to reach you for over an hour, he said. Where the hell were you? I didn't answer. Couldn't. My body cam was still recording, but when we played it back, there was nothing. Just static. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been back to Marlborough Avenue, but I know it's not over. The whispers have started again, faint but growing louder. I see shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and sometimes, when I look in the mirror, my reflection doesn't move. I think the house took something from me that night, or maybe it gave me something. Either way, I know it's not done with me, and someday it'll come back to finish what it started. The whispers became unbearable. Every moment of silence was filled with them, growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like my skull would split. They weren't just voices anymore. They were commands. Come back. Finish what you started. I tried to resist. I stayed away from 724 Marlborough Avenue, even transferred my patrol route to the other side of town. But the house wouldn't let me go. My sleep was consumed by nightmares, the rocking chair, the shadow, the thing that looked like me. And when I woke, it was always the same. The whispers dragging me closer to the edge. It was a Wednesday night when I finally gave in. I'd been off duty, sitting in my apartment with the lights on and the TV blaring, trying to drown out the sound of the whispers. It didn't work. They grew louder, drowning out the TV until the screen flickered and went black. That's when I saw it. The rocking chair. It wasn't in my apartment, but I could see it. A faint reflection in the dark TV screen. And sitting in it was the shadowy figure from the house, staring at me with hollow eyes. Come back. I don't remember deciding to go. One moment I was in my apartment. The next, I was standing outside 724 Marlborough Avenue, the cruiser idling behind Main. The house looked different now. Its windows glowed faintly, like there was something burning inside, and the air around it felt heavy, suffocating. I stepped inside without hesitation, the door swinging shut behind me. The whispers were everywhere now, coming from the walls, the floor, even the air itself. The house wasn't just alive. It was awake. The living room was empty, save for the rocking chair, which now faced the center of the room. My flashlight flickered as I approached, and for the first time, I noticed something on the walls. Words, scratched into the peeling wallpaper, layered over each other until they were illegible. Except for one phrase, repeated over and over in jagged letters. It's not you. What does it mean? I muttered, my voice trembling. The whispers didn't answer, but the rocking chair creaked, shifting slightly. I turned toward the basement door, which was open, revealing the stairs descending into darkness. The whispers grew louder, urging me down. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, my flashlight barely piercing the black. The basement was different now. The walls pulsed with a sickly light, and the floor felt soft, almost alive. In the center of the room stood the figure, the thing that had taken my shape. It turned as I approached, its hollow eyes meeting mine. "You came back," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, raising my gun. The figure tilted its head, grinning. "You already know." The shadows around it began to writhe, growing taller, darker, until they consumed the entire room. I felt them pressing against me, cold and suffocating. As the whispers reached a deafening crescendo, "It's not you. What does it mean?" I screamed, my voice cracking. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw something else in its hollow eyes. Not malice, but pity. "You were never supposed to leave," it said softly. "But you did, and now you're broken." "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible over the whispers. "You will." The shadows surged forward, engulfing me completely. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I felt myself falling, though there was no ground beneath me. The whispers became screams, then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the middle of the street, the house behind me. My cruiser was gone. The streetlights were out. The world was dark, empty, wrong. I turned back toward the house, but it wasn't there anymore. Just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. That was a week ago. I'm still on the force, still patrolling, but nothing feels real anymore. People talk to me, but their voices sound distant, like they're coming from the other side of a wall. My reflection in mirrors still hesitates, and sometimes it doesn't move at all. The worst part? The whispers are gone, but I can still feel the house. It's inside me now, watching, waiting. I don't know what it wants or how long I have left, but I know one thing for certain. I never really left, and neither will you. The days blurred into nights. Time had lost all meaning since my last visit to 724 Marlborough Avenue. The house wasn't just inside me anymore. It was me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its walls. Every time I moved, I felt its floorboards groaning beneath me. The whispers were gone, replaced by something worse. Silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting, watching. I tried to continue working, but my colleagues noticed. Harper pulled me aside after my third missed roll call. "Jake, you're not yourself," he said, his eyes filled with concern. "Take some time off. Get your head straight." I wanted to tell him, to make him understand, but how could I explain? How could anyone? So I nodded, handed over my badge, and left. My apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in on me. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting just out of sight. I wasn't safe anywhere. Not from the house. Not from myself. It was 3:33 a.m. when I woke to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. Heavy, deliberate, moving toward my bedroom. My heart pounded as I reached for my gun on the nightstand, but my hand froze halfway there. A voice echoed through the room, soft and familiar. "Jake, it's time." The voice was mine. I turned toward the doorway, and there it stood, the figure, the thing that had taken my shape. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and its too wide grin spread across its face. Behind it, shadows poured into the room, writhing and twisting like living smoke. "You've been running," it said, stepping closer. "But you can't run from what you are." "I'm not you," I spat, forcing my hand to grip the gun. "I'll never be you." The thing chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You already are. You left a piece of yourself in the house. And now it's time to come home." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around me like cold chains. I fired, the muzzle flash lighting up the room, but the bullets passed through the figure as if it wasn't there. The shadows tightened their grip, dragging me toward the doorway. I screamed, clawing at the floor, but it was no use. The figure leaned down, its face inches from mine, and whispered one last thing. "You were never meant to leave." When I opened my eyes, I was back in the house. The walls were alive, pulsing and shifting with every beat of my heart. The air was thick, suffocating, and the whispers were back, louder than ever. I was standing in the living room, the rocking chair in front of me. It was empty now, but the shadows that had dragged me here lingered, watching. I turned slowly, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The house was different, larger, endless. Every door led to another hallway, every hallway to another room, all of them wrong. The furniture was twisted. The windows showed nothing but darkness, and the air buzzed with static. The figure was gone, but I could feel it. I could feel me. I don't know how long I wandered through the house. Hours? Days? Time didn't exist here. The whispers guided me, pulling me deeper into its maze. And then, finally, I found it. The basement. The door was wide open, and the air spilling out was colder than death. I descended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. At the bottom, the rocking chair waited, and sitting in it was me. Not the shadowy figure, not the thing from before. It was me exactly as I was. Uniform, badge, everything. It looked up as I approached, and for a moment, I thought it was crying. "You're here," it said, its voice trembling. "You shouldn't have come back." "What are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the oppressive silence. The other me shook its head. "I'm what you left behind. The part of you that was whole. The part that was real." I stared at it, trying to make sense of the words. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't leave this place. Not completely." It stood, the rocking chair creaking as it shifted. "You can't go back. Not after what you've seen. What you've done." The shadows began to close in, wrapping around the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I backed away, my flashlight flickering as the air grew colder. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not staying here. I'll find a way out." The other me smiled sadly. "There's no way out, Jake. There never was." I ran through the endless hallways, through the twisting rooms and the shifting shadows, but the house wouldn't let me go. It was alive, its walls closing in, its whispers screaming in my ears. And then suddenly I was outside. I was standing in the empty lot where the house had been, the fog swirling around me. My cruiser was gone. The streetlights were gone. Everything was gone except for me, and the silence. I don't know how I got out or if I really did. The whispers are gone now, but the silence is worse. It's heavy, suffocating, and full of waiting. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see the house behind me, just for a second. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear it. Faint, almost imperceptible. "Come back." I don't know how long I can resist. But if you're reading this, remember one thing. Some places aren't haunted. They're hungry, and once they find you, they never let go.